People do this in your relationships with them, all the time, is they'll offer you a kind of mishmash of what they think you want, or maybe even what they think they want, or what they should offer. And if you really listen, and now and then you'll hear the person say something that they really mean and that's true. And if you reward that, because you can if you learn to listen, if you reward that, then more of that will happen. Now, that can be daunting, because you got to ask yourself if you really want to know what your wife thinks of you, for example. But in the long run, it's probably a better idea than finding out in divorce court, 25 years later. So people will hide bits of wheat in the chaff, and what you do as a discriminating critic is dispense with the chaff, but identify the wheat. This is a really important thing to know when you're mentoring people, when you're grading, but when you're communicating with people in general. What you're really looking for, if you're wise, are things to reward. Now, you dispense with everything that's second rate, not because you want to criticize and get rid of or rise above the person that you're criticizing morally, but because you want to get to the wheat. And it was frequently the case, for example, when my students were maybe writing the first essay of the semester, that, literally 95% of what they wrote was just painful. It would have been easier just to rewrite the essay than to grade it, and so seriously. But, one of the things I noticed is that if I circled a couple of sentences that were genuine thought, the students were so thrilled that someone had noticed when they dared to put their head up above the parapet and say something they believed to be true and genuine, that the next time they wrote an essay, it would be more like 30 or 40% that. And then if they got further reward for that, assuming they had the talent and the diligence, then perhaps by the end of the semester, it would be like 90% genuine thought, genuine wheat. And then they were thrilled about that too, because people are thrilled to have the opportunity to offer their best, especially if it's received in the right manner. People will often obfuscate and produce what's second rate because they're terrified in their heart of hearts that if they did reveal themselves genuinely, that, which is also a way of making yourself vulnerable, because it lets people see who you really are. If they did reveal themselves genuinely, that would be rejected. And so part of the reason that my students delivered such dross to begin with was because they had a history of having what they offered that was good ignored or condemned. And so often they'd hide under the cliches, they'd hide under giving the professor what he wanted to hear so they would get a good grade, because they had sickened of the risk of doing something genuine and having it be rejected. And that's something else to know in your relationships, man. You got to be very careful not to punish the people around you that you love for doing something good, because you can eradicate what's good with punishment quite rapidly. And so it's a deep thing to understand that you need to be watching the people around you all the time to see when they hit the target and to point that out. And people love that. If you do that to people around you, they'll be so thrilled with you, you could hardly stand it, right? Because all people but those who are utterly nihilistic and faithless will risk offering something genuine from time to time in the desperate hope that it is in fact noticed and appreciated. And if you can transform yourself into the sort of person who notices that and rewards it, then people will bring their best to you, and that's a great deal. Now, it's demanding in a sense and frightening, because if you start to encourage the best in other people and you set that as a standard, you more or less have to apply the same criteria to yourself, and that can be daunting. And so, we tend to engage in a pathological dance with other people, and they offer what's second rate to us, and we accept it and offer what's second rate to them. And we do that because we can shirk responsibility and because it lets everybody off the hook. But, you know, there was a famous Soviet joke, typical Russian humor. They pretend to pay us and we pretend to work. Right, that's a brutal joke. That's a brutal joke. That's the sort of joke that destroys everything, right? And did, in fact, because the Soviets were well on the way to destroying everything when they finally destroyed enough so that they fell apart. And thank God that happened without the Third World War, which we seem to be striving mightily to bring back right at the moment, by the way.